Rachel Morgan arrived just past 9 p.m., the wheels of her carry-on barely making a sound against the polished marble floor of the Briarcourt Grand, one of the most prestigious hotels in downtown Denver. There was no entourage, no flashy car, no assistant trailing behind. Just her 48 years old, composed and tired from a day of board calls she hadn't even planned to attend in person. She wore soft black loafers, a simple cream blouse tucked into dark slacks, and carried a worn leather tote over one shoulder. Her look was neat, professional, but intentionally understated. She wasn't there for attention. All she wanted was a warm bed and a quiet night before her early meeting. The next day she had built this hotel, every corner of it reflected her vision, and tonight she was simply seeking rest in a space she had once dreamed of creating. Behind the check-in desk stood a young woman with a sleek ponytail and long acrylic nails tapping absently at her keyboard. Her name tag read, Emily. She didn't look up immediately, finishing whatever she was typing before flashing a generic smile. "Good evening. Checking in." Rachel returned the smile and replied with calm warmth, "Yes, under Morgan. Rachel Morgan." Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard and then stopped. Her expression shifted subtly. "I'm not seeing anything under that name," she said. Rachel nodded, unfazed. "There should be a suite held under the owner block." Emily hesitated, glanced at the screen again, then spoke a bit more firmly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're actually at full capacity tonight. It's for guests only." Rachel didn't flinch. She'd been in rooms like this before, polite on the surface but charged with silent assumptions. She took a quiet breath, steady as ever, and said, "I am a guest. In fact, I'm the owner of this hotel." Emily blinked, then laughed under her breath, clearly not taking her seriously. "You own the Briarcourt Grand." Her tone carried disbelief, as if Rachel had claimed she was royalty. Rachel simply nodded. She didn't raise her voice or pull out proof she didn't need to. Her name was engraved on the corporate charter and printed on every quarterly shareholder report. But to Emily, none of that mattered. What she saw in front of her didn't match the image in her head of what ownership looked like. The silence between them stretched thin-edged with discomfort. Rachel could feel it, the moment when doubt begins to bloom into quiet dismissal. She was used to that moment. It had followed her through most of her career. People often saw her skin first, her age second, and her authority last. If at all, she could have walked away, demanded a manager, or presented credentials. But instead, she stood still. Her voice remained steady. "I'm not here for special treatment," she said. "Just the room that's always held for me." Emily's fingers hesitated above the keyboard, unsure what to say next. Behind her, the golden plaque on the wall read, "Briarcourt Grand, a Morgan property," but somehow even that seemed invisible. It wasn't just about a room anymore. Rachel knew it. This wasn't the first time she had been overlooked in a place she helped build. But what stung wasn't the mistake it was, how expected it had become. The receptionist didn't pause because Rachel was wrong. She paused because Rachel didn't look right. And that's where the harm lived, not in the error itself, but in the assumption it revealed that someone like her, traveling alone, dressed simply, and speaking softly, couldn't possibly be the woman whose vision shaped the very lobby they stood in. Rachel had learned to recognize that brand of quiet bias, the kind that wears a smile and carries doubt. So she stood there composed and grounded while the moment hung heavy in the air. Her presence alone unsettled the space, not because she caused a scene, but because she didn't. She remained dignified, letting the discomfort of others rise to the surface. Rachel Morgan had walked into her own hotel and been told she didn't belong, and still she stayed because she knew better. She wasn't there to prove herself. She was there to be seen and eventually to be remembered, not just as the owner of the Briarcourt Grand, but as the woman who refused to vanish quietly into someone else's assumptions. Rachel didn't say another word after stating who she was. Instead, she stepped back from the counter, her eyes quietly scanning the lobby. Its marble pillars, Art Deco lighting, and the large gold-frame painting of a mountain sunrise above the fireplace. She had personally approved that painting. She remembered standing in this very space during the grand opening. shaking hands with local dignitaries, cameras flashing. Now, just a few feet away, a receptionist named Emily had essentially labelled her a liar. The air inside the Briar Court Grand wasn't warm anymore. It had turned tight tense, like everyone was holding a breath. They weren't aware they were holding. Emily, perhaps sensing that something wasn't right, picked up the desk phone and muttered, "I'm going to call the assistant manager." Moments later, a tall man with a crooked tie and clipboard stepped through the side hallway. His name tag read Jason Miller, assistant manager. He had the kind of presence that tried to convey control but never quite made it. His eyes locked onto Rachel with that practiced hospitality smile, polite, impersonal. "Good evening, is there an issue with your reservation?" Emily spoke first, her voice a little too loud. "She says she owns the hotel." Jason's smile twitched, unsure whether to laugh or tread carefully. Rachel remained still. "I'm not claiming I do. My name is Rachel Morgan. It's on the ownership documents and every internal memo you've ever received." The confidence in her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, but it lingered like a ripple across a glassy surface impossible to ignore. Jason's eyes flicked to the reception screen, then to Emily, and finally to the gold plaque behind them, the one Rachel had seen countless times. "Just a moment," he said quickly, turning on his heel. As he disappeared down the hallway, two uniformed security staff emerged from their posts, not aggressive, not speaking, but present. One stood subtly near the elevators, the other loitered by the espresso bar. Their message wasn't verbal, but it was loud. "We're watching you." Rachel didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. She had seen this dance before. Their presence wasn't there for safety. It was to underline suspicion, the kind that trails people who don't seem to belong. She moved away from the desk and stood beside one of the marble columns, her back straight, hands clasped in front of her, not out of nervousness but intention. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance at her watch. She didn't start recording on her phone or ask to speak to corporate. Instead, she took out her phone and made a single call. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. "This is Rachel Morgan. I've been denied access to my own property. I need it resolved immediately. 26 seconds. That's all it took." She ended the call and slipped her phone back into her coat pocket. No outburst, no accusation, just certainty standing tall in a room that no longer knew what to do with her presence. And that presence was beginning to make people nervous. Across the room, a couple paused their conversation mid-sentence. A man seated near the fireplace leaned subtly to get a better view. The front desk grew unusually quiet, and Emily's fingers danced awkwardly over her keyboard as if typing would somehow make the issue disappear. The doorman, who had previously greeted every guest with cheer, now stood frozen, unsure if this was something to step into or something to step away from. Rachel was used to these moments, these pockets of silence where everyone was too afraid to ask questions, yet too intrigued to look away. It was the sound of doubt multiplying itself across every corner of the room. The weight of that doubt wasn't new to her. It came dressed differently each time, in a tone, in a glance, in the space between words, but it was always familiar. Rachel knew that once again her credibility was being assessed, not by her achievements, not by her role, but by her appearance. To some, she still looked like someone standing in the wrong place, asking for too much. But she didn't shift her posture, didn't soften her gaze. She had nothing to prove to the people in this room. What she carried was far heavier than indignation. She carried memory, the memory of every time someone decided without cause or curiosity that she didn't belong. And now, standing beneath her own name, engraved in bronze behind that desk, she waited, poised, silent, undeniable. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, drawing quiet attention from the staff and guests scattered throughout the lobby. Two men stepped out, one in a tailored grey suit clipboard tucked tightly under one arm, and the other in a branded fleece jacket that marked him as someone important but more operational than polished. Mark Evans, the regional vice president, led the way, his steps quick and eyes scanning the room until they landed on Rachel. Right behind him was Tony Ramirez, the district manager, slightly out of breath from what was clearly a rushed arrival. Neither of them paused. They didn't need to ask for confirmation. They knew exactly who she was, the moment their eyes met hers. The tension that had wrapped itself around the lobby snapped clean. "Morgan?" "We are so sorry," Mark said. Reaching her in less than a dozen steps, his voice was full of urgency, but softened by respect. Tony followed his tablet already in hand, flipping through screens with practiced fingers. "We're taking care of this right now," he added. Behind them, Jason Miller emerged again, looking like a man who had just realized the room he walked into was burning. He tried to speak, but Mark shot him a look that stopped him mid-breath. The receptionist, Emily, froze behind the desk, her face turning a shade paler by the second. The smile she had offered earlier was now long gone. She had seen a name, ignored it, and now she was watching that same name change the temperature of the entire building. Tony tapped on his screen quickly. "Suite 1702 has been cleared. Your driver's being rerouted for tomorrow morning. Your usual fruit tray and espresso order will be in place." Rachel gave the smallest nod. "Thank you," she said quietly, but her eyes remained alert, still watching not the room, but the people in it. She wasn't looking for courtesy now. She was watching for change. How many of them would stand straighter, who would suddenly speak with more warmth? She had lived through this before, the moment when the air shifts, not because of who you are, but because people finally realize what title you hold. And she wanted to see it, wanted them to see it in themselves. Mark turned to the desk. "Has she been checked in?" Jason stammered a partial answer, but it was Tony who handled the moment. "It's being processed now. 2 key cards. Full executive setup incident report will be delivered to your room." Rachel remained still, and the rest, she asked, her voice firm. Mark gave a short nod. "We've issued a site-wide notification. Corporate audit team is on standby. All current staff will undergo recertification on guest protocol. Disciplinary action starts tonight." Behind the desk, Emily's hands twitched, those once careless acrylic nails, now tapping the keyboard in a completely different rhythm, not bored, not mechanical, but nervous. Rachel's gaze didn't soften. She looked directly at Emily, then back to Mark. "You'll speak with her?" she asked. Mark cleared his throat, standing straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Privately, HR will be present." Tony looked like he wanted to add something, but Rachel raised one hand. "I'll speak to her too. Not now. After I've rested." There was no anger in her voice, no ego, only precision. It was the kind of tone that had once made banks reconsider their terms, that had turned dismissive VCs into silent investors. She didn't need to raise her voice to command the room. She was the room. As she took her keycards and turned toward the elevator, the entire lobby seemed to shift. Conversations paused. People lowered their phones. Guests stopped pretending not to watch. But still no one said a word. Rachel didn't acknowledge. The doorman didn't glance back at the front desk. She didn't have to. With each step toward the elevator, she made it clear respect wasn't a favor you give when someone earns your admiration. It was a standard you uphold from the start. And tonight, everyone in that lobby had been reminded of what real power looks like when it finally walks in and takes its rightful place. Rachel took the elevator alone. The brushed silver doors closed slowly, sealing off the noise and pressure of the lobby behind her. She didn't sigh or slump. Her spine remained straight, her expression unreadable. In her hand were the 2 key cards neatly labeled, newly printed. The weight of them wasn't heavy, but the moment they represented was. As the elevator ascended, she didn't think about revenge or humiliation. She thought about precision. Accountability wasn't about making an example, it was about making a correction. And corrections, if done right, could shift the culture of an entire institution. That's what she was after. Not apologies, but change. When she stepped into the suite, the door already ajar from a rushed housekeeping check, she took in the space without a word. The scent of lemon and eucalyptus lingered faintly in the air, the sheets crisp, the lighting dim to the right hue. A tray of fresh fruit sat on the table beside a set of neatly stacked espresso pods and a small folded welcome card with her initials. She moved through the suite, slowly inspecting, not for dust or clutter but for care. Details mattered to her. They always had. The space was quiet, composed, almost like her. She placed her tote on the edge of the bed and sat for a moment, hands folded, letting the stillness settle around her like armor. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. A message from corporate confirmation of her requested internal review, a placeholder for a meeting with HR, and a question: would she like to issue a public statement? Rachel stared at the screen, unmoved. She typed back, "No statement. Schedule the HR meeting for morning private." She didn't want headlines. She wasn't interested in performance. This wasn't a story for social media consumption. It was a moment of organizational truth. The hotel didn't need a press release. It needed recalibration. Quiet, serious, lasting recalibration, and she would see to it personally. Later that evening, she requested a check-in from the night manager, not to scold, but to verify protocol. When he arrived at her suite, visibly nervous, she offered a calm smile and asked him to walk her through the revised check-in policy for executive-level guests. She made notes, asked questions, suggested improvements. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she mention the incident at the front desk. Instead, she focused on the systems, the things that needed to evolve, so people wouldn't be left to rely on assumptions. When the night manager left, he didn't feel scolded, he felt instructed, and more importantly, he felt seen. The next morning, as dawn broke over the Denver skyline, Rachel dressed deliberately. Charcoal blazer, ivory blouse, subtle makeup, and a soft gold watch that had once belonged to her grandmother. There was a grace in her ritual, a sense of ownership, not over others, but over herself. She didn't walk into that hotel lobby seeking recognition. She moved through it as if she belonged because she did. Every footstep was quiet but grounded. Every interaction was brief but intentional. People noticed, they stepped aside without being told. They adjusted their posture without being asked. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper awareness. Because Rachel Morgan wasn't there to flex power. She was there to model it. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands respect without ever raising its volume. She understood that true leadership didn't need a stage, it only needed presence. And that presence, when rooted in purpose and steadiness, could shift an entire organization. She didn't need to be loud to be heard. She didn't need to punish to create accountability. She needed only to show up as herself. And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her what it looked like when professionalism wasn't a performance, it was a principle. By 6:30 a.m., the lobby of the Briar Court Grand was beginning to stir. Guests trickled in and out, with steaming coffee cups and rolling suitcases, their chatter soft and routine. Behind the desk, the night shift staff exchanged nods as they handed over logbooks and room updates. But in the executive conference room, tucked quietly past the concierge station, the atmosphere was entirely different. Inside, the lights were low and the windows slightly frosted by the chill of early morning. Seated at the polished walnut table were three people: Jason Miller, still wearing the same tie from the night before, Emily Sanchez, noticeably subdued, her posture small, and Marta Jennings, a no-nonsense HR director from corporate, already scribbling into her legal pad. And standing at the head of the table was Rachel. She didn't take a seat. Her presence alone was grounding, calm, unshaken. She glanced down at the folder in her hands, then looked up, voice steady. "Let's begin," she said. The room went silent. She turned her eyes to Emily. "First, would someone like to explain what happened last night from your perspective?" Emily looked down immediately, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't recognize her. I just didn't expect." Rachel waited, giving space but not rescue. Jason tried to fill the void, clearing his throat. There was clearly a breakdown in process. "We've already started reviewing." Rachel raised a hand gently. "This isn't about covering. It's about seeing." Her words were precise. No aggression, just clarity. She turned her focus back to Emily. "Was I rude to you?" Emily shook her head. "No, ma'am. Did I raise my voice? Threaten you?" "No," she replied again. Even softer this time. Rachel stepped closer, but her tone never changed. "Then help me understand something. Why did you assume I didn't belong? Emily didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth wasn't in what was said. It was in what had been assumed. Rachel didn't press. She let the silence speak. Then she turned toward Marta. I don't want this to become a firing squad. That's not why we're here. But I do want accountability, not just for what happened, but for what made it so easy to happen in the first place. Marta nodded solemnly. We're prepared to issue a formal write-up. Emily will be removed from front desk rotation until retraining is complete. Jason will be placed on administrative review. Rachel nodded. She didn't smile, didn't frown. That's a start, but this isn't about checking boxes. I want us to go deeper. She paced slowly along the edge of the table. How many of your staff know who built this hotel, or what it took to build it? Do they know that Briarcourt wasn't funded by a private equity giant, but by a woman who once worked night audit and had to fight to get a loan approved? The question lingered in the air, heavy, personal, uncomfortable. Exactly as it needed to be. She stopped near Emily again, her voice softening just enough to show humanity without losing edge. Do you know how many properties I've built? 17. From Baltimore to Phoenix, all designed to offer luxury without arrogance, accessibility without assumptions, hospitality that's human. She stepped back now, hands gently folded. I didn't come here for validation. I came here because something broke, and what's broken won't be fixed with a training slideshow. It has to be felt, understood, internalized. She looked across the table. Every person who walks through our doors, old, young, dressed up, dressed down, deserves to be seen with dignity. If we can't start there, then we're not in the business of hospitality, we're just in the business of transaction. No one spoke. Even Marta's pen had stopped moving. Rachel let the quiet sit for a while longer before offering a small, slow nod. You can keep the corrective actions on file, but I want more than compliance. I want comprehension. I want every employee on this property and eventually across every Briarcourt location to understand what respect looks like when no one's watching. That's the real test. She finally took her seat, signaling the end of her opening remarks, but the weight of what had just been said lingered like morning fog. This was no longer about last night. This was about the future, about the kind of culture she would no longer ask for, but require. And she made that clear, not through anger, not through force, but through unwavering expectation wrapped in grace. The staff lounge behind the coffee bar was quiet, almost sterile in its stillness. The hum of the fridge buzzed faintly beneath the low glow of the overhead lights. It was a space meant for brief moments, microwaved lunches, quiet, coffee breaks, glances at phones during shifts, but that morning it held something heavier. Emily Sanchez sat alone at a narrow table, her shoulders slightly hunched, a half-eaten blueberry muffin untouched in front of her. Her phone was face down. Her eyes were distant. She looked like someone trying to disappear. When the door opened, she startled, then froze entirely when she saw Rachel Morgan step in. Rachel didn't send for her. She didn't ask HR to facilitate. She walked in herself without announcement. No clipboard, no barrier. Relax, she said gently, pulling out the chair across from Emily. I just want to talk. Emily sat up straighter, trying not to knock over her coffee. Yes, ma'am, she whispered. Rachel offered a soft shake of the head. Drop the ma'am. This isn't a hearing. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind that invited thought rather than tension. Then Rachel leaned back, her gaze calm. Have you ever worked a job where you felt small? Emily blinked, then slowly nodded. Most of the time, Rachel waited, encouraging her to continue. Emily exhaled. I worked at a diner off the freeway for a year. Paper hat, long hours, never enough tips. Some customers ignored me, some called me kid, even though I was pushing 30. I felt invisible most days. Rachel nodded slowly, then met her eyes. So you know what that feels like to be unseen. Emily's expression shifted, first confusion, then realization. Yeah, I do. Rachel let that truth settle before continuing, her voice steady but vulnerable. So help me understand last night, when you looked me in the eye. How did you decide I didn't belong here? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with regret. Emily looked down at her lap. I don't know. I didn't mean to. When you walked in, I thought maybe you were lost or waiting on someone. You didn't look like... She stopped herself. Rachel's expression didn't change. Didn't look like what Emily bit her lip. Her voice barely audible, like the kind of person who owns places like this. Rachel didn't flinch. She'd heard that sentence before, spoken or implied, but this time she decided not to let it slide into shame. And what does that kind of person look like? Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. That was the point. Rachel leaned forward, her voice firm but gentle. That picture in your head. It doesn't just live there. It seeps into your decisions. It leaks into your behavior, and sometimes it hurts people. I wasn't angry last night. I was tired because what happened, it wasn't new. She paused, then offered a piece of herself. I started as a receptionist, got mistaken for housekeeping more times than I can count, called sweetheart and honey while running operations behind the scenes. I've walked into my own boardrooms and been asked to grab coffee every time I had to choose fight or move forward. And when I finally had the power to build something of my own, I swore I'd make space for others to grow. Emily's eyes widened. You started as a receptionist? Rachel smiled faintly. In St. Paul, my first boss said I sounded too educated for the front desk and moved me to night audit. I took it. That was the beginning. Emily almost laughed in disbelief, but it wasn't funny. It was sobering. That's unreal. Rachel looked at her directly. It shouldn't be. It should be normal. She stood now, not abruptly, but with intention. I don't need perfection from you, but I need awareness, because every person who walks into this hotel deserves dignity. And if you start there, if you lead with that, you won't ever have to recover from moments like this again. Emily stood too. Thank you, she said quietly, for talking to me. I mean that. Rachel nodded once, then turned and walked out, not for praise, but because something had finally landed where it needed to, in the heart of someone who might never make the same mistake again. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the Briarcourt Grand had returned, at least on the surface. Luggage wheels rolled across polished floors. The espresso machine hissed behind the lobby cafe. A family asked about the zoo. But inside the executive office suite, something deeper was shifting. Rachel Morgan stood by the window looking out over the valet circle below. Her arms were folded not in frustration but in focus. She wasn't here for damage control. She wasn't here for drama. She was here for recalibration. Around her, a quiet team assembled. Mark Evans, Tony Ramirez, Marta from HR, and a handful of department leads. The whiteboard behind them held scribbled bullet points, but what Rachel carried in her mind went far beyond surface-level fixes. I want story modules in the new training program. Rachel said, voice even, real scenarios, real guest interactions, not canned scripts with obvious answers. She turned toward Marta. When someone walks through our doors, we don't know their backstory, but we do know how they should be treated. That should be the baseline. Marta nodded, scribbling notes. Tony chimed in. We're adjusting our hiring pipeline for the front desk, not just for hospitality experience, but for emotional intelligence, empathy screenings, bias pattern testing. Rachel nodded slowly. Good, but don't make it performative. I don't want them rehearsing inclusivity. I want them living it. The tone of the meeting never spiked. There were no dramatic declarations, no firing announcements. Instead, it was strategic measured. Rachel didn't want headlines. She wanted infrastructure. Also, she added, put me on the site, visit rotation starting next quarter. Mark looked up surprised. You want to do site visits, not secret ones. Rachel clarified. Just unannounced. I want to walk into our properties like any other guest and see who we really are when no one's being watched. Tony leaned back slightly, eyebrows raised. That's going to make a lot of managers nervous. Rachel smiled faintly. Good. Let them sit in that discomfort can be instructive. She moved across the room, scanning a stack of printed evaluations and personnel notes. One page was flagged with red ink a front desk hire in Phoenix who had received multiple guest complaints for condescension. Another report documented a conflict between kitchen staff and a new server over language barriers. Rachel made quiet marks on each sheet, pausing at times, circling notes, drawing lines. We don't build culture through slogans, she said, half to the team, half to herself. We build it through repetition, quiet corrections, small standards, and we do it until the habits stick. Her tone wasn't motivational, it was instructional. She was shaping not just policy, but behavior. The difference between Rachel and so many others in her position was simple. She didn't lead for applause, she led for permanence. By Friday, she said, I want the new onboarding packet live. Include these real-life excerpts. Let staff hear the stories of our guests, in their own words, not some polished brand speech. Let them read about the mother who was turned away because she didn't look like a typical guest, or the young couple who were overcharged because of an accent. I want our people to feel that weight, not carry guilt, but build responsibility. Mark, Tony, and Marta exchanged glances, not because they doubted her, but because they were already starting to believe it was possible. As the meeting wound down, Rachel didn't linger. She slipped the marked-up personnel files into a folder, tapped it once against the table, and stood. We've done the easy part, writing it down. Now we do the hard part, living it out. Her heels clicked softly as she crossed the room, but the message she left behind was louder than anything she said. Because real reform, the kind that sticks, doesn't arrive with camera flashes or press releases. It arrives in whispers, in rewritten protocols, in quiet moments when no one's watching. And Rachel intended to change this company not through noise, but through every unseen decision that came after. The sun filtered gently through the sheer curtains of Suite 1702, casting long golden rays across the plush carpet and the edge of the bed. The morning air inside the room carried the faint scent of fresh linen and citrus, a quiet contrast to the echo of change still lingering from the day before. Rachel stood near the desk, her travel bag neatly zipped, her laptop closed, and charger coiled beside it. Everything was in order, except for one unexpected detail. On the nightstand beside the espresso machine was a single folded piece of notepad paper. No envelope, no logo, just her name written in careful, slanted print. Miss Morgan. She picked it up with both hands, unfolding it slowly, already sensing what it was. The handwriting was young, unsure in parts but deliberate. The words read, "Thank you for your grace. I'll be better." Signed, Emily. That was it. No dramatic apology, no list of excuses, just honesty and intention. Rachel stared at the note for a moment, her thumb resting lightly on the edge. It wasn't corporate slick, it wasn't written for show, it was human, and in many ways that made it matter more than any formal memo or public gesture. She folded it once carefully and slipped it into her purse, not as a souvenir, but as a small symbol that something had landed where it needed to. Rachel took one last walk through the suite, checking nothing in particular. She touched the corner of the nightstand, smoothed the bed cover with a palm, and straightened the fruit tray just slightly. As she exited, she paused at the threshold, not out of hesitation, but acknowledgement. This room, this building, had tested something in her, and she had responded not with fury, but with clarity, with presence, with grace. She didn't need to win anything. She had come to remind this place who she was, and to remind herself that quiet strength could still shift the ground beneath her feet. Downstairs, the lobby was calm but alert, like the whole staff knew she might reappear at any moment. She walked through without hurry. The doorman, the same one who had glanced past her 2 nights before without a second thought, stood tall as she approached. This time he didn't just nod, he stepped forward, opened the glass door with purpose, and said with genuine warmth, "Safe travels, Miss Morgan. We hope to see you again soon." Rachel turned slightly and smiled. "You will." No smugness, no sarcasm, just quiet assurance. A full-circle moment, unforced, but unmistakable. Outside, the car was already waiting, engine humming softly. She slid into the back seat without speaking, the folded note still in her purse. As the car pulled away from the curb, Rachel didn't look back. Not because she was dismissing the past, but because she had already claimed what she came for. And in its place, she was leaving behind something else, heavier than luggage, but more meaningful. She was leaving behind the weight of being underestimated, the burden of always having to prove her worth. What replaced it wasn't triumph. It was something better, quiet resolution. A sense that the ground had shifted not just for the hotel, but for her. As Denver's skyline blurred past the car window, Rachel's reflection flickered faintly in the glass. Not the CEO, not the brand builder, just the woman, the one who had once worked night audit shifts in silence, the one who had once been called sweetheart while balancing a budget behind closed doors. She thought about Emily's note about the receptionist who had once looked at her and only seen a guest without a reservation, and now perhaps saw her fully. That was enough. Not everything needed a podium or press release. Some goodbyes speak loudest in the quiet, and Rachel Morgan this morning was finally at peace with being heard without having to raise her voice. The car moved quietly through the Denver streets, the early morning sunlight casting long golden shadows across brick storefronts and half-lit cafes. Inside, the atmosphere was still. Rachel sat in the back seat. Her posture composed, her hands folded gently in her lap. She wasn't scrolling through emails. She wasn't reviewing her schedule. Instead, her gaze rested out the window, her thoughts somewhere far beyond the passing scenery. In her purse was Emily's note, simple handwritten, and now folded so neatly it could have passed as a business card. But to Rachel, it meant something much more. It was a symbol of something shifting, not just in others, but in herself. She had lost count of how many times people had made assumptions about her, based on her skin, her age, her quiet, the way she dressed when she traveled, the way she refused to perform for the comfort of others. It wasn't just about being mistaken for someone she wasn't. It was about being denied the full weight of who she was. And what hurt the most was that it rarely shocked her anymore. Even now, after decades of building, leading, and proving, she still had to reintroduce herself in rooms she designed. But that morning, in the silence of that car, Rachel wasn't bitter. Bitterness ages you in ways leadership never should. What she carried wasn't resentment. It was memory. And memory, she had learned, could be transformed into something more powerful than revenge reform. As the city slipped behind her, she thought about the receptionist who looked at her and saw someone who didn't belong, about the security guards who stood at ease until her name made them stiffen, about the way the hotel had only come alive once someone with a clipboard confirmed who she was. And she thought, why does it still take a title for someone to treat you with decency? But then, almost as quickly, she answered herself. Because too often people confuse worth with performance, with polish, with power that shouts, instead of power that simply is. That was what she wanted to leave behind, not a punishment, not a warning, but a mirror. One that forced people to look at their own reflexes and ask, what made me so sure I knew who that woman was? Rachel had never been interested in walking into a room and demanding authority. Real leadership, she believed, wasn't loud. It was consistent. It was present. It didn't need applause to know its value. It showed up when things were hard. It spoke plainly when others avoided truth. It held grace under pressure, even when it wasn't returned. She had modeled that this week not through power moves or grand gestures, but by staying still when others expected a storm. And in doing so, she reminded everyone, not just at the Briarcourt Grand, but anyone watching, that leadership isn't something you wear. It's something you carry, quietly, until the moment arrives when everyone else finally sees what you've known all along. The car curved onto the airport road signs flashing overhead, check-in, departures, rental return. Rachel glanced at her reflection in the window, calm, composed, but thoughtful. She could feel a chapter closing, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something deeper, alignment. She had taken a moment that could have become a scandal, a headline, a soundbite, and turned it into a lesson. one that wouldn't echo through press conferences or interviews, but through private conversations, new hiring policies, retrained eyes behind lobby desks. She hadn't burned the place down. She had built something better in its place, and that was always the point. As the car came to a smooth stop, the driver opened her door. Rachel stepped out, one heel touching the pavement, with the quiet confidence of a woman who had never needed permission to stand tall. She reached for her bag, nodded her thanks, and began walking toward the terminal. Behind her, the car door closed with a soft click, and the city exhaled. Her message, though unspoken, remained suspended in the space she left behind. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to know who you are and walk like it. And she did. With every step. No spotlight, no announcement, just presence. The kind that leaves a mark long after you're gone. Deep inside HQ, we believe the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest. They're the ones that speak to truth, grace, and quiet strength in the face of being overlooked. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you reflect on your own assumptions, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel for more real, thought-provoking narratives that shine a light on dignity, justice, and the people who choose integrity over noise. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters. And remember, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to know who you are and walk like it.